Welcome to Making Maverick Moves, the podcast where we dive into bold, unconventional actions that break the mold and redefine success. Today, we are tackling a game-changing question. Who are you when you are big? My guest today is the incredible Kimberly Roush, executive coach, speaker, and author of Who Are You When You Are Big? Kimberly has coached top executives, entrepreneurs, and high achievers to break through limitations, step into their full potential, and lead with confidence. But here's the twist. Her big philosophy isn't just about success. It's about becoming the boldest, most fearless version of yourself. So if you've ever felt like you're playing small, holding back, waiting for permission to take that big maverick leap, this episode is for you. Kimberly is here to help you break through self-doubt, set bold intentions, and grow into the person who makes waves, takes risks, and owns their maverick move. So are you ready? Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Kimberly.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Can you tell us how you came to this place of helping others discover their big selves?
I can. So I was in public accounting for 22 years. I was a national partner at KPMG. I got promoted into a national role, which was having the IT auditors and the financial statement auditors play nice within the firm. And I was dealing with the top 2 and 3 people in the whole firm. I felt so out of my league. I didn't feel like a leader among the leaders. And so I asked if I could have an executive coach. And my boss was like, sure, that's a great idea. And it was amazing. 3 months into the role, the chairman of our firm was diagnosed with brain cancer, and 3 months later he passed away. And I was working on leadership to feel like a leader and whatnot. And then all of this happened. And my coach said, well, what's going on with you? And I said, oh, I'm safe. I'll be in this role for another, year. When I'm done with this, they'll give me some other great position, more title, more money. They always have. They always will. And he just said, wow, why don't you look at the aspects of your job that get you out of bed in the morning, the things that have you energized and engaged, the things that have you, can't wait to get into work in the morning or staying there late at night, losing track of time, and then figure out the position that would allow you to do that stuff the most within KPMG. And I thought, wow, had I just said they will give me some great position, they always have, they always will. Because if you had asked me, I would have told you that I had taken initiative for every step of my career. And yet this very passive statement just came out of my mouth, and I was like, wow. And so, I ended up going down this path of trying to explore that. And maybe I was a slow learner, but it took me probably 6 months to answer that question. And when I realized what really had me excited and engaged and empowered and, all of that, it was when I was putting out a really big challenge in front of people within the firm and then inspiring them to go after it and then coaching and developing and mentoring them along the way. And that was the fun part of my job. It was the stuff I got to do. It wasn't the stuff that was the hard, onerous work that my ego was so tied to and, I thought made me so important and all of those things. It was just this fun part. And, I looked at roles within the firm that would allow me to do that and ultimately just came to the conclusion that, wow, what if I did what he did? What if I stepped out? What if I took that great big partner hat off my head and set it aside? I mean, nobody does that. But what if I did and, and could actually get off the hamster wheel and get on the Ferris wheel, right? And so I made that bold move to step out. And I'd love to talk about bold moves because you use that language. So I stepped out and I went from being, Kimberly Roush, this national partner and global firm with resources at my fingertips, to becoming Kimberly Roush, entrepreneur, one-woman show. I was feeling really small. Even though it was a very deliberate, intentional, well-planned out, it was daunting and it was a little scary. And thank God I had a coach to continue to help me through it. But I got out and I was feeling small. And so naturally I had a coaching session on it. And I said, who am I to coach executives? I've never been an executive. And he's like, you don't think a national partner in a Big Four public accounting firm is an executive? And I'm like, well, we never called ourselves that, you know? And he's like, well, who are you when you're big? And he asked me that question, and he had me write something out. And that was the source of the question. And big is all about being in an empowered state of mind, knowing your strengths, your values, your gifts, and stepping into it and doing it in a deliberate and intentional way, not a brash way, not ready, fire, aim, not I'm tired of this and I'm going to run to something else, but I don't know what I'm running to, but rather, what do I really want? And I think when you really know what you want, it doesn't even feel all that bold or scary, or because you've planned it out. You've thought about it. You've put time and effort into it.
So where do you get to that place where you know exactly what you want? Because I think that's that place that people may never get to, that because they feel that they have to be absolutely sure. So can you kind of talk us through how you get to that point where you're willing to jump off that cliff and hope that the parachute helps you land safely?
Sure. You know, I think I was just hearing something yesterday on risk tolerance and how different people view risks in different ways. And I talk about this a lot with clients. Oh, I'm not a risk taker. I'm not a risk taker. And it's like, I think you take risks. You just, or take very measured risk, and you manage risk, and you calculate it before you do it so that it does or doesn't feel like a risk at the time. But I think that's a good place to kind of talk about. Alan Millam is my coach, and he's my co-author on the book too. But he wrote this book, Bold Moves, and he talks about barely move makers. Those are kind of the couch potatoes in life. They sit on the couch. They let life happen to them. They just show up to work every day, but they're not taking that initiative. They're sort of maybe feeling a victim to their circumstances. They're really operating from fear and insecurity and doubt. And then there's brash move makers. And brash move makers, are kind of ready, fire, aim, but they can get a lot of followers because people like action and people see action as leadership. And so, but they're not necessarily going in the right direction. And what's kind of interesting, what I find about brash move makers is sometimes they're just willing to take a big risk and they'll just course correct along the way. And they're okay with that. And so that might be a little different risk tolerance, but I still think that oftentimes those moves are not driven by intention. They're driven by running away from fear or insecurity still. The difference between a brash move maker and a bold move maker is that bold moves are deliberate and intentional. They're coming from hope and possibility. They're not running away from anything. They're running towards something. I never doubted whether I'd made the right move. It was just going to take longer than I thought it was going to. But I never doubted whether it had been the right move. Because I planned it out so well going in, I didn't need a contingency plan, which was pretty cool, right? Mm-hmm. And so, again, I think it's all about it's about the right level of discovery, the right level of planning, the right level of intention, knowing yourself well enough to know what you're aligned to know your strengths and your values and your gifts. And when you see something that is such a natural fit, it doesn't feel risky. It doesn't feel so scary.
This is a good time to talk about what it means to be big and feeling big. I read your book when you gave it to me a while back. I reread it, and I get that feeling in my stomach of invincibility when I hear you describe what it is to be your biggest self. Can you talk about that a little bit and inspire us about what it's like to be big?
Sure. And let me tell you how it felt when I discovered it. So Alan had asked me this question, who are you when you're big? And he had me write something out for our next coaching session. He's like, think back to times when you were thriving. Think back to times when you were, on your game, energized, engaged, et cetera. And, I immediately went to kind of being in front of my team and leading them in a celebratory event after I had given them a great big challenge. And I had my team of 50 people achieve work-life balance. In my 22 years in public accounting, nobody ever felt like they had work-life balance, and we just kept waiting for someone to give it to us. And when we realized that, wow, what if I define what it would be every week? If I could do just 2 things this week to make me feel like I had work-life balance, what would they be? And I gave them permission to do that. I gave them permission to go after it. They started working together to allow each other to achieve their work-life balance goals. And we never missed a single deadline. And my team, they were working incredibly hard, but they felt like they had work-life balance, and it was a mindset. And so when I thought about where am I when I'm big, right? I the first thing I thought of was standing in front of my team as we were doing sort of a celebratory event for that. And I could feel it in my stomach, right? Like I could just feel how I felt in the moment. And I think part of the problem with me answering the question initially for Alan on where is it, the times in my career when I was thriving, I kept trying to think my way into it. And unfortunately, my ego was too tied to it, right? I kept going for what I was known for being good at, or the prestigious positions I had, or the prestigious things that I got to do within the firm. But it wasn't where I felt the most alive, in my soul, in my heart. So I thought about that, and my first version of my big statement says, I'm smiling, singing, doing, I got the going on dance, right? Like I had that feeling. And once I had that feeling, it was like, oh, like big is simply a state of mind. Mm-hmm. In every moment of every day, I have a choice to make, and I can choose to feel small, or I can literally just step into being big. And I used to think about literally walking out from behind my desk and stepping into the sort of this circle on the floor and saying, okay, I'm going to make myself feel that way. I'm going to imagine it in my whole being, in my body. And when I get there, like it was easy to come up with additional times when I felt that way and to describe what it was when I was feeling that way. I realized that number one, big is a state of mind. It's simply a state of mind. And everything in life is the story we make up about it. So we can make up really defeating, stories that bring us down, or we can kind of reframe the situation and put it into something that is more empowering. I was working with a lot of people in transition. And, some of them are like, oh my God, I'm a loser. I've already had to pick my career. It's all downhill from here. I don't know if my marriage is going to survive. Those sound drastic, but those are actual things that go through people's minds. And I've worked with over 5,000 people in transition. Or you can say, oh my gosh, that job wasn't right for me anymore anyway. This is a career coffee break. Look, I get to spend time with my kids and reconnect with my spouse. And look at all these great people I'm meeting, networking to find my job. And, what if I get to choose what I go to next and define it better for myself? And, this is just a mid-career reset. Who do you think is going to land faster, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody who's doom and gloom, or somebody who's like taking advantage of this? Invariably, the people who were enjoying this break and this journey landed faster. Your state of mind is number one.
So what I hear you saying is you've got to change that mindset. Can you give us some tips as to how we make that connection and maintain that connection? Because I think it's easy for us to do it for a little while, but then life shows up. How do we become big?
There's kind of a process that I tend to take people through, and it's really an expanded version of what Alan had asked me. What are the times when you were, on your game, energized, engaged? And I call it thriving moments. It's like, what were the times in your career or in your life even where you were just on fire, like you were clicking on all cylinders. You were in that state of flow. And then think back to those times. Oftentimes when I'm helping people with interviews or even in their branding, it's like, okay, get it down to sort of a story. What was the situation? What was the action? What was the result? But what I think is desperately missing is, why was it so meaningful to you? What was it about it that had you thriving? And when I realized that in every time when I was thriving, I could stand back and I could see I had put some great big challenge out in front of people. I'd inspired them to get there. One was organizing a team for the multiple sclerosis bike ride and recruiting people that didn't even have bikes to ride 100 miles on a bike over the course of a weekend, and seeing their faces in Mission Bay Park on Sunday afternoon after they'd ridden 100 miles on a bike. I'm like, I just knew I'd given them something that was good for their life, like something that, where else do they put barriers up where they think they can't do something, and they never even bother to challenge it. What I call that is being able to witness people's magnificence emerging. And I truly feel that's what I get to do. I know it sounds a little corny or whatever, but I want to help them tap into those times and then amplify that and find every opportunity to do that, because those stories tell you about what's meaningful and what you're passionate about and all of that. But they also reveal all of your strengths and your values and your gifts. And big is an inside out proposition. It's not I'm big when some external condition occurs. It's when I'm big, who am I being? How am I showing up? What does it look like? what do other people see when I'm being big? What am I doing when I'm being big? Not that I'm big when I get to do that, but when I'm big, I do that. Just if that makes sense. It's not conditional. It's an inside out. So many people are looking for all this external validation and extrinsic motivators. Oh, I want the bonus. I want the raise. I want the achievement. But what really drives us are intrinsic motivators, and trying to identify and articulate those and really explore what lights your fire. That's a way to identify who you are when you're being big. Another clue is when you are being big, everything's easy and effortless because you're in that state of flow. And so it's not hard. Like oftentimes I would have people tell stories of their greatest achievement, and they tell this story and they want to tell it in an interview, and you could just tell that they were dog tired. They were not feeling appreciated. They were being the martyr, but it's a story they think people want to hear, and they would not get a job if they told that story, or they would not impress their boss in a current job if they were telling that story to demonstrate their brand, because it was just about really kind of ego and an external accomplishment. It wasn't about what had them thriving. But a clue is, where have you felt in that sense of flow? Where have people around you? This is the fourth thing, when you're big, you're giving opportunity for others to be big too. And there's ripple effect, and it's game changing. And it's not just you and your teams, it's your peers, your bosses, your boards, it's your family, it's your community, it's the person in line in the grocery store in front of you, right? That if you have this energy of being big, it's contagious. I believe, emotions are contagious. And I can feel, we've all been around sourpusses and become sour, right? And we've all been around these people that just seem to have it going on and are really self-assured and confident and happy with themselves. And that spreads too. So those are all clues, right? Like understanding where you thrived, identifying your strengths, your values, your gifts, thinking about where you've been in flow, think about how you're showing up. What I have people do is actually write a big statement, and when I'm big, blah, 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 right?
When we come back, we'll talk more about this energy flow and how we can keep self-sabotage from preventing us from becoming big.
Looking for a keynote speaker who redefines leadership? Meet Gina Osborn. As a U.S. Army Cold War spy catcher and FBI special agent executive, she knows what it takes to lead through chaos, crisis, and change. Her secret? Making Maverick Moves. Bold, fearless strategies that break barriers and shatter limits. If you want your audience to think bigger, lead stronger, and own every room, Gina delivers. Book Gina L. Osborn today and unleash the Maverick mindset at your next event. Visit GinaLosborn.com/Making Maverick Moves.
You talk about flow, and that really resonates with me because when we allow fear to come to us, whether it's fear about money, fear about relationships, every time you feel that, I think that kind of breaks the flow. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how do we keep that flow going without the self-sabotage, the negative self-talk, anything that's going to slow us down, the self-doubt?
I believe we actually all have these two voices inside our heads, right? We have a good voice and we have what I call the gremlin, right? The gremlin just screams things at us we wouldn't say to our worst enemy, right? And yet we say it to ourselves all the time, and most of the time we're not even aware of it. It's subconscious. And so what I do with clients is I do a full all-day onboarding session with new clients, and we spend a whole day together. And part of that day is we amplify this positive voice. I want to know what it would say to them in their current situation. Is it the voice of a coach or a boss or a parent or a grandparent or a mentor or a best friend? And what would they tell them in this situation or in general about themselves? I want to be able to amplify that during the coaching relationship. I want to be able to call upon that during the coaching relationship. But then we all have this negative voice, and the negative voice says, things we wouldn't say to our worst enemy, like I said before. The things I was saying when I was talking about the story of everything in life is a story we make up. I'm a loser. I already hit the peak of my career. It's all downhill from here. I'm never going to get a job as good as the last one. I might lose my marriage. My kids think I'm a loser. Those are all limiting beliefs. That's all that negative voice. And that will have you stucker than stuck. unless you learn how to manage it. We all have it. So there's a great book by Rick Carson called Taming Your Gremlin, and he has 3 principles in that book. The first one is simply notice. Like, I have people write down everything they're saying to themselves, and sometimes they just look at that list and say, no wonder I feel like crap, right? And it's like, wow, okay. And then sometimes we need a little more than just acknowledging it. And the second step of his, kind of methodology, if you will, is choose and play with options. So I get people to name their gremlins. I get people to think about what time of day it shows up. And the biggest thing is that I get people to banter with it. And so we turn limiting beliefs, all the negative things that your gremlin wants to say to you, into powerful assumptions. Now, these aren't just positive assumptions. They're not just a logic shift or a shift from a thinking state, if you will. What I'm trying to do is create a new neural pathway in our brain, and we can't do that with some sort of energetic connection to it. So when we banter or get sarcastic or, are a little snarky with it, we're going to have way more power to do that. And so I take every limiting belief that somebody has written down prior to our all-day onboarding session, and we take every one of those and we flip it to a powerful assumption. Like when I went into my national role, I did this with my coach, and I was telling myself things like, I don't think like them, and I'm not in their league, looking to the leaders of the firm I was dealing with day to day. And I don't think like them became, of course you don't think like them. That's why they called you to the table. That's why they created this position for you, which is absolutely true. And I'm not in their league became, and at this stage of their career, they weren't in that league either. Look who you get to hang with. What can you learn from these people? So picture me walking into a conference room with those thoughts going through my head versus the first two. I'm going to show up completely different. And so managing this negative voice is critically important. I'll give you one other funny example. I used to do a program for executives in transition. It was a free month-long group coaching program. Got me, in front of a lot of people. I helped people in a time of need, and it's really fueled my business in terms of referrals over time and whatnot. But we do this exercise in that session, and what I'm trying to do is teach everybody this skill. And so we have them write down for a week everything that kind of pops into their head, and then they come to the session ready to share just one of the things that they've written down. And then we go around the room and we say, okay, everybody, let's help this person flip it. And we don't want to do it through logic. We want to be snarky. And, we're kind of teaching because people will go to logic. They'll go to problem solving. And it's just not going to do it, right? And so this one guy who's probably the most successful in the room, by all accounts, and the thing that he'd been telling himself his whole life, he said, my whole life I've told myself that I'm in trouble or I'm going to get in trouble. And everybody was like, this guy saying that? It was like, really? And so, it took us a little while to turn it around, but that's okay because we just keep going until we get it. And what's funny is when we get it, we will see a shift in their physiology. They will laugh, or they will sit back, or their shoulders will go down, or, you can see it physically in their body and their energy when we find the right thing. And we just keep going until we find it. And we were having a little trouble this day getting to it. And so I kind of sat back and I said, okay, what happened when I got in trouble? And I just started cracking up, and I just said, spank me, baby. He is never going to say that to himself again without just breaking into a laugh, right? Like we've created a new neural pathway. It is gone. He'll say it to himself again, right? Because we do that. The key is do I have an ability to manage it? Do I recognize when it's taking me over? Do I slow down and simply notice the things I'm saying to myself? And do I choose and play with options, like in Rick Carson's book? I also get people to name it. I had a guy whose name was Tom, and this was Honorable Tom, and this was Doubting Thomas, which soon became known as DFT. And one day he had a box he sent me. It was a records box, and he had this big chain around it with a padlock, and he sent me a picture, and it said DT on the front of it. And he was so proud of himself because he had locked the gremlin away for 2 weeks. So he thought he had mastered this. And I'm like, it's not about stuffing it away. It's about when it shows up, almost inviting it out to dance and then pulling the rug out from underneath it. And that gets to the third point of Rick's book, which is be in process with it. Understand this isn't a one and done. It's going to come and go. Anytime you try and make a bold move or a maverick move, anytime you try and challenge the status quo, your gremlin's going to get really loud because it doesn't feel safe. It feels risky. And so much of what we perceive as risk is simply our gremlin trying to hold us back. And so when we can actually challenge all of that, we can move forward with confidence.
When you're right there getting ready to make your maverick move, there's one thing that's stopping you. So is it fear? Is it doubt? The consequences that could possibly happen? So what is your advice to people who really want to make this move, but they're stuck?
One of my coach's questions that usually just like drives me a little crazy, I'll be stuck on something and I'll say, oh, my gremlin's got me. And he'll say, how do you know it's not your whisperer? I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Because it's the way I feel. I feel like crap. It can't be my whisperer, right? And it's like, oh, well, what if there's something there for me to pay attention to? What if there's something I haven't considered? What if there's something I need to consider? What if there's, something that I can plan for, or I can mitigate, or I can challenge, right? Maybe it's just getting my gremlin to hush up, but maybe there's something that I can look at that I haven't yet considered. And I think that that's actually a good thing. I want that. You almost want that to happen, because when you overcome it and move forward with confidence, you're going to feel even better. And so it's like, pull it out, look at it, like talk to it, and go down a path with somebody and find out, is it just my gremlin showing up, or is there something for me to look at there? Is there something that that can make me more self-assured moving forward? A lot of whether you're running away from something or running towards something. So whether you're making a brash move or a bold move, I've got people in jobs and they're not happy and and they just want to get out, or they just want to, and they're looking at, and man, I want to go be an entrepreneur. I'm tired of the, the corporate boss and all that. And it's like, are you, like if they're focused on that, I'm not convinced they want to go there. If they say, oh, my family was an entrepreneur, I just have this dream. I just know this is what I want to do for the second half of my career. And there's resilience in that. And I think it's really, really important. I heard, we couldn't put it in the book because we couldn't verify it, but I had heard this story and I just thought it was fascinating. So just know it may not be true. But what I had heard was that Barbara Walters was interviewing Oprah. And as they were kind of, getting sat down and, just chatting a little bit and whatnot, Oprah thought Barbara Walters had said, "Why do you work out?" And that's not what she actually said. And they were like, "Oh, no, ha, ha, ha. No, why do you work?" And she said, if you picture a graph, and I'm going to try and draw it backwards, right? So she said, oh, it's my life's purpose. It's my calling. I can't imagine not doing it, and da-da-da-da-da, right? And it was kind of this North Star of progress up, right? And, yeah, sure, there's been ups and downs, but she's achieved it. And there's this resilience that sort of goes on when you know what you're going for and you're intentional about it, right? And so then they kind of laughed and said, well, why do you work out? And she said, to not have a fat butt. This is according to the story. Again, we looked for it to try and put it in the book and we couldn't find it. So it may not be true. And so just bear with that. And, the weight is on the bottom, axis, right? And fear can be a great motivator. And this is why I think brash move maker people come in, right? Fear can be this great motivator for action. And so we create this action. And as soon as the distance between, what I'm afraid of and where I am goes away, we tend to fall back down. And so that's why perhaps her health journey has gone up and down, as opposed, because she's running away from being unhealthy, right? As opposed to running towards being healthy. And so fascinating. And, whether the story's true or not, I think the point is made. And when we're running towards something, I think we just have this incredible resilience. You hear so much talk about resilience.
So it sounds like there is some work that needs to be put into this. I know that some people want to avoid that type of internal work. Do you think you can ever get to that place of being big if you don't do that work?
I don't. However, I like to think of it as not being work, but having it be play, right? Like, how do you do it in such a way that you enjoy the journey, that it's fun, that it's intriguing to you? You know, I'm an extrovert, right? I had a coach that helped me through it. I had a coach that I talked it through with, because that's how I process. That's how I think. I have to think out loud. And while I might have done work on my own in between sessions, my real journey and exploration occurred when I was talking it out with somebody, whether it was him or somebody else. And it's kind of funny. He has another question for me that, always gets me. I'll be sitting here laboring over something stuck, my gremlin's going away, right? And he would be like, well, what would make it easy? In other words, where could I create that flow, right? And I was like, And I'd be like, I might throw things out, if I had a magic wand, or marketing is not my gig, right? Maybe if I had a marketing degree, or maybe if I had, and I'll mention all these things, and then it'll be like, well, maybe if I had someone I could bop down the hall and throw my ideas around, right? Well, I'm a solo entrepreneur. I don't have somebody, right next door to go. But he'll be like, gee, do you know anybody like that? And I'm like, of course I do. Any one of those 5,000 people that went through my boot camp program, right, would be honored to have me ask for their help. Let me bounce my ideas around or think something through with them and call on their expertise. And if that's how it makes it easy for me, then find a way that's going to make it easy.
This is a magical book. Who are you when you are big? Kimberly Roush, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Super fun. It's so great to see you again. And I think that your big statement's a fun testament to all of this. And you've certainly sort of been through this process. So I think you know the power of it for sure.
Making Maverick Moves with Gina L. Osborn is produced and edited by Lisa Osborn. Theme music, Maverick Heart, is by retired IRS criminal investigative attaché Clarissa Balmaceda. Connect with us on social media through GinaLOsborn.com/Making Maverick Moves. And don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Making Maverick Moves wherever you get your podcasts.